With me on today's show is Josh Rossi from Los Angeles in sunny California. Josh is a very accomplished and successful commercial photographer who specializes in composites for advertising. With an impressive client list, Josh has made a great impact in the world of commercial advertising, which we'll be talking about a little bit more today. Not only is Josh well known for his commercial photography, he also runs his own great podcast as well, which I was very honored to be a guest on recently. So hi Josh, I'm really thrilled to have you here with us today, and we're turning the tables again here with you in the hot seat this time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Our topic for today is, as I said, commercial advertising photography, and we'll talk about how you got into that and some of the great things you do. But first, can you give us a quick rundown of how you got into all this to begin with?
I originally did art when I was a kid, and then I thought that I couldn't make money doing that, so I went off in a different direction. I worked in restaurants and that whole thing. At some point, I turned the tables a little bit and started doing wedding videography. And at that time, I owned my own business. I was doing pretty well, but I always hated photography. I hated photographers. It wasn't anything personal. I just didn't like photographers. I thought they had it easy. I thought the videographers and cinematographers had a lot more difficult job because they had to get 24 frames in a second that were good instead of just one shot. So so I had this idea that photographers were kind of lazy, that they had an easy job, and it's really ironic because then a couple years after that, I actually got into wedding photography. That's how I started. I quit my job. I had to get a part-time job at some point. I saved up enough money to do wedding photography full-time, but I started doing these really crazy composites for brides, and it didn't really work out. They didn't get it, basically. And I remember at one point I was at a wedding show and I was doing the coolest composites. I had like a bride from a rope coming down a building, and people were wondering, is she escaping the wedding? Like, well, what's the whole, this isn't romantic. It's cool, but it's not romantic. We want candid shots, that whole thing. And somebody from New York, a big-time editor that was at the show, I don't even know why she was at that wedding show, but she came up to me. She just sat in front of my booth and she looked at me and just with this really weird look on her face, she said, "What are you doing?" And it was a little bit offensive, but I knew she meant something else. There's a different meaning behind that. And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, I'm doing wedding photography. And she's like, "No, I mean, what are you doing here? Your work is commercial. It's not for wedding photography. You shouldn't be here right now. You should go all out as a commercial photographer. Have you ever thought about doing that?" And in my mind, I kind of, that's where I wanted to be. But in my mind, I thought that's impossible. There's no way I can ever become a commercial photographer because those photographers are big time. Those are the ones that are, making big bucks. They work with big companies. I could never do that. But anyway, shortly after that, I actually decided to quit weddings completely and just go into commercial photography, and it sort of worked from there. Now, I sort of skipped a step. I actually went to advertising school. Before I got into wedding videos, I went into ad school, and that's where I got my inspiration for becoming a ad photographer. I would just see a bunch of really cool photography and I would study. I would stay up till 2 a.m. for months and months. I remember it took me about 2 years to come up with my style because I would stay up looking at the best photographers. I would combine styles. I would try to figure out what I loved. And that's sort of where I got my style from. And then after that, that's when I got into the whole wedding photography thing, and then the rest of the story that I told you.
So you went to school for advertising photography, and then when you came out of there, you kind of took a wrong turn and went through the wrong door and ended up in the wedding photography space.
Yeah, it was sort of interesting. To me, though, it wasn't really the wrong door because if you start off without any shooting experience at all, then it's going to be a lot tougher to get into the commercial market.
Right.
So I started just shooting candid shots and just practicing. So basically my wedding time was me practicing and also dealing with brides. Holy cow, dealing with Bridezillas, that was the best training I could have had for dealing with, bigger companies. I mean, seriously, if you deal with a bride that gets angry, that hates your work. I mean, I flew all the way out to Italy once to shoot a wedding, and this person, they hired me because they loved my work. They loved the style and everything. And after I delivered the photos to them, they completely hated them. But the thing is, I showed all my friends, I showed all my colleagues, and they said, wow, these are wonderful photos. Like, you have, you came up with some great stuff. So it wasn't just me that was crazy. And so this person just hated it for no reason whatsoever. And it was just really bad situation because they spent all this money for me to go out to Italy, all this money for the photos. But yeah, like I said, if you can deal with Bridezillas, then you're fine in the commercial world.
Right, sort of a trial by fire, really.
Yeah.
A bit of a gut punch, though, isn't it, when you do all that effort and work and somebody turns around and says they hate it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was straight up, we hate these photos. You're such a bad photographer. I don't know how you ever started shooting weddings. I was like, you guys are crazy. Like, how come you're so negative? These, like, everybody else loves these photos. The thing that I realized is that in Europe, people have sort of a different standard, I guess. And they're used to a certain way of shooting as opposed to here in the States. And to narrow it down even more, in Utah, where I was living at the time, they had a really specific wedding style.
Right.
And so to transfer that into the wedding market in Europe, it was just really difficult.
Let's take a look at the commercial side of things, because aside from obviously being fire retardant and having a thick skin and being able to deal with these sucker punches and all this kind of thing, what do you think the top qualities are for someone to be successful as a commercial photographer in the advertising space where you are?
I think you need to really have a personality that isn't, you can have a laid-back personality, but you need to be on top of the photo shoot. You need to be the one that's commanding. You need to sort of show your clients that you know exactly what you're doing without a shadow of a doubt. So you need to be very confident, especially when you're on these photo shoots. But also meeting with clients, you need to be very confident. They need to see that not only you're a likable person, you're cool to work with, but you really know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be asking them any questions about process or procedure as far as photography goes. I know some people, they get really nervous when they're working with a big client and they say, oh, is this what you're looking for? Is this what you're wanting every 2 seconds? And it comes across as not confident, comes across as you're not knowing what you're doing. So I think that's super important. And then there's the whole idea of really not giving up and just keep pushing forward, because if you're used to a 9-to-5 job, you're used to this somewhat security of getting a paycheck. With commercial photography and other types of freelance work, it's never a steady paycheck. It's always big chunks of money here and there. And so being good with business is just a must. I think, there's so many qualities. I could go on, but I think the first one that I mentioned, being confident, I think that's a really important one.
And being able to weather those kind of quiet periods where, as you say, you'll get a job here with a big chunk of cash and then pretty much a famine for a bit, and then you'll get another one. And so that kind of roller coaster can really wear on people sometimes, and they get very nervous during those quiet times of like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is the business dying or something? Where's the next job coming from? Are there any kind of personal strategies that you can think of that would help people get through those kind of dry times?
Well, I just think you have to have a savings account. That's the only strategy. No, you have to just be good with your money. I remember the first real big job that I got in the commercial world. So I was doing small jobs here and there, but then I started stepping up my pricing. I got this really big job, big chunk of cash that would last me for a year. Like it was a year's worth of income and more, actually. And I ended up spending it within 3 months on gear, on all this, because you get this mentality of you think that you're going to continue to get that exact same work the rest of your life. It's just this weird mental thing that happens to you. As soon as you get a big chunk of cash, you think, oh, this is how much I'm worth. This is how much people are going to pay me for now. And you think you stepped up, and that's how it's always going to be. But that's not the case. I think when you get big work, you got to realize that you could, for the next 2 years, you could be getting small work. Or, you could be getting big work. There's strategies to that, but you just have to be good with your money, have a savings account, and really not spend it right away. I feel like you should, if you ever get a big job, you should just hold on to the money for a little bit, for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and then you'll see, how things are going in the market.
Of course, don't forget Uncle Sam wants his portion of that too.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I've gone through years where you spend the money and it's like, yeah, this is awesome. And then you realize you have just a ton of taxes at the end of the year, So that's another thing is to I have like 5 savings accounts. I have one for personal savings. I have one for like charity donations. I have one for taxes, one for sales tax, and then another one for just random stuff. So you have to take a big chunk out of that initial money that you're getting and put it aside.
Great advice. You obviously have some very big clients. I think I saw quite an impressive list on your website, Adobe and all kinds of companies. And when I first came across your website, I was immediately reminded of John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire, because the style is so recognizable. And I saw that you also did his artwork photography for his podcast and all that kind of thing, which is great. But, how do you go about positioning yourself in this kind of market? I mean, how do you make yourself stand out from the competition and be different enough that companies want to hire you?
That's the most difficult question ever, because I mean, it's so tough to answer that. I mean, there's things that I do personally that I've seen people do that make them stand out. I mean, one is the individual style, but at this point, there's so many individual styles that are so crazy, so good, it'll just blow your mind. I mean, for example, I just picked up my copy of Lurtzer's Archive 200 Best Digital Artists, and I made it in there with a 2-page spread. So I was thinking, wow, like, I wonder, I mean, you get sort of, I don't want to say pompous, but you get excited about this opportunity, and it starts getting to your head a little bit, thinking, oh, wow, I got into this prestigious magazine. But then picking up the copy and looking at the other work, I felt like a mouse on, Everest, because of the talent that's out there. And sometimes you can get in your head thinking, your work's really good, you're at a good place in your life, and then you get a rude awakening seeing other people's work that is 10 times better than yours. So the style can go on and on. There's a lot of people that have very unique styles and good work. So aside from the style, I think there's a lot of things you can do to be unique, to get noticed. I mean, one of the main things is your marketing, how you're marketing to people. Now, marketing is boring most of the time. A lot of people are doing the same exact stuff. Now, I've interviewed over 240 photographers on my podcast, and I hear a whole range of marketing, but few people have very creative marketing. And I think that's what gets people noticed. Things such as doing a newsletter, even though that sounds basic, not a lot of people do it. Sending out a newsletter to your clients, something entertaining, creating content for your clients, instead of always asking for the job or coming across as this needy photographer that always needs work. You need work, you need help and all this. You come across as providing something for them, providing good content, something interesting for them to read. Now, that's something that I think will set a photographer apart. Not just the generic email, not just the generic mailer, but something that's more interesting. So there's a lot of things that will set a photographer apart, but I think those two are the main ones. Having a style, obviously, that is sellable, and then having creative marketing.
We're sort of in a world right now where content marketing is becoming much more sort of important and to the forefront than it ever was before, even though it's been around in principle for quite a long time. And I think photographers in particular are kind of a bit late to the party when it comes to content marketing. And by that, what I'm really talking about is using your website and blog to put content out there that is of value and of interest to the people who are going to be your target audience, but not written as a straight kind of advertising or blatant kind of marketing piece, but just something that informs and entertains and builds relationships with people. And I think, the more that photographers embrace that kind of thing and do things like send out regular emails, as you said, to their audience that are just simply, hey, here's something great for you. It doesn't even have to be something that they created. It could be something that they just found that they thought, hey, these folks over here would be interested in this if they haven't already seen it. It's a case of becoming much more sort of involved and connected with people as well. So I think, that what you said there was actually really great advice. And I'm glad to see that you're sort of putting that into practice. I noticed on your website that you also have this, it's almost like a minibus type thing that you call the mobile office. And it's all neatly outfitted with a fantastic image wrap and all this kind of thing around it. It looks pretty cool. What is that? What's all that about?
It came from my idea. My dad called me a couple years ago, and he said there's this trend in New York and LA, mainly in New York, of not only these food trucks that go around, but these mobile, I guess, clothing stores and mobile stores in general. They sell all sorts of things. And so he said, this is something that's not really on the West Coast yet. You should do something like this, but for photography. And I thought, sure, I guess, whatever. We'll see how it goes. So I got my bus and I found some random bus and redid the whole thing myself. Took out the inside, took out all the seats, cleaned the whole thing up, painted it, added wood floor. So the inside became my office, my mobile studio, not studio, my mobile office. And so I thought, at least I'll use it for this. If the other purpose doesn't work, I can at least work out of it and go to photo shoots, and that'll be a cool idea. So then on top of that, I decided to put a wrap on it with just advertising my photography. And at first I thought, I'm going to get so much business, it's going to be crazy because this is a new idea and that whole thing. So drove it around for a while and got really depressed because nobody was calling. I would only get people that wanted very cheap photo shoots. So sort of, I don't know, people with unrealistic expectations as to what I did, how much things cost. So I got sort of depressed. It wasn't working for what I wanted it to work for. But then after about a year or so, I realized the true importance of what I had done, and I sort of did it by accident. So as photographers or whatever we do in business, the main idea is to be at the top of the mind of your customer. That's why we market. That's why we send out emails. That's why we, send mailers to people, so they will remember us over other photographers or over other companies. And so that's what the bus did for me. It really put me in the forefront of people's minds, because now all I have to mention is I'm that photographer who has a bus, and they remember me. Most people in Salt Lake City, where I used to live, I would basically park in front of the freeway for days on end and work inside my bus. Even in the middle of summer, I was just sweating like crazy. I finally got an air conditioner, thank goodness. But so I would sit there and just thousands and thousands of cars would drive past me. And I would get text messages. I would get emails saying, hey, I saw your bus today, But then eventually it turned into work. Years down the road, people would remember me because they said, we were thinking of a photographer. We remembered you. You had that cool bus, and everybody mentions the bus. So instead of, getting instant business, it really became a huge billboard for me. What photographer has a billboard or a mobile bus to remind people? It basically punches people in the face and says, remember me? I'm that photographer that you liked a while ago. So I don't know. It's been really beneficial.
I've actually heard recently several people who have said, hey, I'm getting a wrap for my car, and I'm going to drive around town in my car that's got my photos on it and, the website and all this kind of thing. But essentially what you're saying is that if they're going to do that, it's not something that's going to create instant business. It's something that has to kind of soak in for a while.
Yeah, exactly. I think that a lot of people will get a billboard. I think it's the same thing with a billboard. People aren't necessarily going to call right away when they see a billboard. Companies buy billboards because it reminds people of them. Not necessarily. They don't have a number. They're like, for example, Apple. I'm here in LA. You drive down the street, you see 10 iPhone billboards. And where on there does it have a number? Obviously you know that it's Apple, but it has no call to action. It has nothing on that billboard. It's just for the sole purpose of reminding you that you need to buy an iPhone. Now, something I used to do, and this didn't work as well, but when I was doing wedding photography, I put something on the back of my car. Now, my car wasn't the nicest in the first place, so maybe that was why I was getting a bunch of calls from people that wanted cheap service, but I put wedding videos and I have my number underneath. So like I said, I got a bunch of calls that I never really booked anything from that. And I think what I learned from that, as opposed to putting my name on a huge bus, is that I don't think I would ever put a wrap on a car again, because it doesn't seem as big and bold and professional as having your name on either a bus or a billboard. And I know that costs a lot for photographers to do, and it's not for everybody, but the car thing didn't really work out for me. It just didn't seem professional. It didn't have the same effect as the bus did.
I've heard from quite a few photographers lately who are either considering putting a wrap on their car or have actually done it and they're kind of driving it around. But, as you say, it's not a targeted form of marketing either, unless you happen to drive into the neighborhoods where you actually want to get your target clients from. It's fairly non-targeted. So, attract all kinds of people from all different demographics and that kind of thing, and have different budgets and so on. So you're probably going to have to sift through a lot of leads in order to get the best ones for your business. Earlier on, you mentioned the fact that the bus is kind of large, it's visible. How does that compare to a car?
The bus being so big, it's more targeted. If you have a car, you're basically targeting everybody and nobody at the same time, because I don't feel like many people are going to really notice that. It's not, I mean, the whole purpose of doing a car wrap is so that people notice it, so that you basically are just punching people in the face with your advertising type thing. But that effect, I don't think that happens with the car. I mean, you see everybody from dry cleaners to plumbers, they have the same thing. Everybody's on a car or maybe a small van. So if you were to do that thing, it wouldn't be any different. People would just think of you as a small-time business. The thing that is different, though, is when you do large-scale prints like the bus or like a billboard or something like that. That gets you a more targeted audience, even though it's not super targeted, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You will get response from that as opposed to just having the car.
Let's switch gears for a little second. Obviously, there's a lot of people who want to get into this type of business and that kind of stuff and get into commercial and advertising photography. But what would you say are the top mistakes that people are making when they're trying to get into this business?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see photographers doing, especially in the commercial photography world, is that their work isn't ready. It's not presentable enough to be able to go out and get the work that they are wanting. I mean, for example, if you think about a company that has a $50,000 to $350,000 budget, do you think they're going to spend that money on your portfolio? Maybe so, maybe not so much. You have to really have an honest look at your work and say, would somebody pay me for this? Now, the biggest reason somebody would pay you for the work you're doing is because they see that you're very consistent, that you can recreate that style over and over and over again. So brings us to my next point of photographers' work not being consistent, not having a consistent portfolio. And like I said earlier, I talk a lot about this because it's so important. You have to have not only sellable work, but you have to have just a consistency throughout the whole thing to get people to trust you. So what do I mean by consistent? A lot of the times photographers will do a series. So for example, I did a series called The Color Run. It was for an actual company, but we did a series of 8 photos that were very similar. If you go to my website, joshrossi.com, you can see that. You can see a couple that are in there, but art directors and ad agencies and companies love seeing that. So if you don't have a series in your work, the quickest way to getting into a consistent portfolio is to create that series. I mean, it can be based around any type of theme. Like I did around the color run, I've done a bunch for like a car type shoot, but you just want to stay around a consistent theme, consistent style. Now, as far as sellable work, what will make your work sellable? I think that's another huge thing that a lot of photographers aren't doing. This is what I do now. Every time I have a personal project, it's not just for fun. If it's just for fun, I pretty much just scrap the idea. I always have a purpose in mind when I'm doing a personal project. I'll really focus in on the companies I want to work for. For example, right now I'm trying to target car companies. I have a lot of my stuff in my portfolio that's for entertainment and other commercial work, but I'm really trying to target these car companies. So in my personal projects, I will literally throw out all the other ideas that don't have anything to do with cars at the moment. And then I'll take that one car concept and really play with that. That's where I can have fun. But I think if you're trying to build a portfolio, not only that's consistent, but that's sellable, you need to always have a purpose when you are designing it, when you're shooting it.
So once they have a portfolio together, it seems, at least to someone like myself who's on the outside, that the whole sort of advertising agency, commercial photography space, especially with the big guys, is kind of a bit intimidating. And I guess I have this perception that it's very ruthless and cutthroat, and that these people are just kind of like very quick with the criticism, and people come and go pretty quickly. But is it really like that? I mean, what should people expect when they're trying to get into this?
I mean, I think in a way it is, but in a lot of ways it's not. So when you're working with people from maybe New York or LA, you have to really look at the landscape and how people are getting contacted, how often they're getting contacted. Because, for example, in LA, you might get that ruthless type response from people, because if you're not ready and you show up at their door, you show them your work, they might say, all right, see you later. They might see your work and be like, all right, thanks, goodbye, or they might even tell you they don't like it. But the thing is, it's not really like that. I was so scared for years because of that exact thing that you just said. I was scared that it was so ruthless that I could never get in. And I thought that that's how it was everywhere. But I mean, there's so much work that comes from other places besides New York and LA. And people are nice. I mean, this is how you have to think about it. The people that are going to look at your work and refer you are probably art directors. Now, these art directors, they're getting in at base jobs in these ad agencies, and they're put over, looking at portfolios. So they're not like the head of the company. They're not the people that are the ultimate decision makers. They're the ones that are just looking at the work and, seeing if it will match the job that they have. So it really is not that scary. Now, when you meet with people, this is something I mentioned earlier. You got to be confident, because if you're not confident, you really get sort of a one take, just a one chance on these things. Photographers try for years to get into a dorm. As soon as they get in, they might screw it up. You really need, and I know that sounds super harsh and not, doesn't help the people that are fearing. It's when you're ready, it'll all work out. You just have to go in, show your portfolio. It's really not that scary. Sometimes I've had 20 people sitting around my work, huge creatives in an industry or in an agency, and we're all laughing, talking about random stuff. It's just that initial impression. Right when you come in the door, you meet them, and they're just normal people, just like you. You have to be a normal person. You can't be nervous or scared. You just have to be cool with them, and everything will be fine.
They're not the fearsome beasts that we might imagine them to be, right?
No, they're not the fearsome beast. I mean, when you think of fearsome beast and how the industry is, initially, this is what I thought, you think that you're going into a sales meeting with Coca-Cola and some of the biggest corporate executives that they have, and you feel like they could just totally rip you apart because they're so much bigger than you. And like I said, most of the time, that's not even the case. You're talking with art directors that are getting into base level jobs. I mean, not saying that art direction is a base level job, but most of the time, that's sort of at the bottom in the agency. Mm-hmm. So if you look at it that way, things will happen a lot easier for you.
I think if we had to summarize that, then it would be develop a consistent body of work in a series, preferably, of things that are kind of related to each other and have a consistent style. Make sure that the work that you do is commercially sellable, and you can do that by having peers review it, having other people look at it and give you their opinions, and hopefully professional opinions, not your mum or your girlfriend or something, but people who actually know about this kind of stuff. And then being confident, having the self-confidence and conviction in your work, stand by it and keep your head tall and go into these meetings on an equal footing, with the people that you're meeting with. Don't let them, intimidate you, or don't be scared of the idea of what it is that you're going into. Just go in there and be relaxed and confident and just treat them as human beings, which is what they are, right?
Yeah, you said it perfect.
Okay, so one last question for you. If you could steal a time machine, if you could, bop Doctor Who over the head with a kosh and steal his TARDIS and go back to when you started out, what advice would you have for your earlier self?
I feel like I did things the right way. Now, that might sound weird, but every experience that I had really led me to learning the things that I know. So if I didn't have certain experiences, I don't think I would be where I am now. But I mean, looking back, I think I would just tell myself to maybe not be scared. That's probably the only thing I would tell myself, is to not fear the industry, just to go out and try things. Because all the success that I've seen in my career and in my life has been because I've done something. If you fear fear is debilitating. It makes you not move forward. It makes you not do things for stupid reasons. So if you just don't fear, if you stop that fear that creeps up, there's fear of everything. It doesn't even matter what it is. But that is the thing that stops most people from being successful. So I just had some fear at the beginning, and thankfully I pushed through it, but I could have pushed through it a lot quicker just by connecting with people, by going out and meeting people. Once you actually do those things, you realize that life is so much easier, that this other reality existed that you never thought existed. It's just called normal life, how things work. If you contact somebody, they'll probably respond. You might get work from an email that you sent. I mean, things like that. Just keep moving forward, and that's probably what I'd tell myself.
Wonderful. Well, Josh, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful for you spending your time and sharing your expertise and experience with us. If people want to get in touch with you or they want to learn more about what you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can go to my website, joshrossi.com, and you can see my portfolio there. I'm also doing a training on how to become a commercial photographer. And like I said earlier, it's very in-depth. It's not, you were asking me, how do photographers get into the industry? And I had, a small answer because there's just so much to get into. So you can go to fulltimephotographer.com, and that is where the training is. Also, you can go to the podcast and everything from there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Josh. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me.